The second entry in the 3D viewport's Object menu is Set Origin. The options here have already been covered in detail in video 13. Moving on, we come to Mirror. Before we look at this entry's submenu, we'll discuss the simple idea behind the mirror operation. Imagine we've added a mirror to our scene. What would the reflection of a selected object look like in that mirror? The answer depends on where we place the mirror and the angle it is at relative to the object in question. In our example, we can see a cone reflected in the mirror. The mirror command moves and reorientates an object so that it appears as it would within the mirror. The axis options in the mirror's submenu determine the angle of the imagined mirror, it being perpendicular to whatever axis we select. The position of this theoretical mirror is determined by the current value of the transform pivot point. With the transform pivot point set to 3D cursor and choosing the global z-axis from the submenu, our cone shifts to the position we saw before in our imagined mirror. Let's return the cone to its original position and rotate in 45 degrees about its y-axis. We'll move the 3D cursor to the tip of the cone and see how each of the mirror's submenu axis options affect the result. The first option in the submenu is Interactive Mirror. This allows us to select the mirror axis by holding down the middle mouse button and dragging to near to the required axis. The axis set is determined by the Transform Orientation setting. A common use of the mirror operation is when creating symmetrical objects. We can start by creating one half of the shape and then duplicate it and use mirror on that copy to create the second half of the shape. After Mirror, we come to the Clear options. We've met the first three options of its submenu before using keyboard shortcuts. Location resets the position of the selected object to the world origin. Location 0, 0, 0. Rotation sets the object's rotation about all axes to 0. Scale resets the object's scaling factor back to 1.0. All three of these options create a last stop panel containing a single checkbox labeled Clear Delta. Deltas relate to animation and will be discussed in a later video. The Origin option relates to child objects. When applied, a child's origin is moved to the location of its parent's origin. This also moves the child's mesh. So, assuming the origins of both objects are in their default locations, the child object may disappear inside the parent if the child is the smaller of the two. To demonstrate the next set of options, we'll start with a cube. Scale it in the Z direction, move it, and rotate it about its x-axis. Apply is the next Object menu entry. Location returns the selected object's origin to the world origin. Notice that the mesh itself does not move. Rotation realigns the local axis of the selected object with the world axis. The orientation of the object itself is unchanged. Scale resets the scale factors of the selected object to 1.0 without changing the size of the object. All transforms applies the location, rotation, and scale resets. Rotation and scale applies only the rotation and scale resets. This is useful since, in most cases, we are unlikely to want an object's origin returned to the world origin. The remaining set of sub-menu options can be ignored at this time. The next few entries have been described previously, so we can skip Snap, Duplicate Objects, Duplicate Linked, and Join. Using Copy Objects and Paste Objects is an alternative way of making copies of the selected objects. They even have the conventional Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V keyboard shortcuts for copying and pasting. This is similar to using Shift-D to duplicate an object. The only difference being that while Shift-D also initiates a move operation, Ctrl-V does not. Asset refers to those objects that are marked as assets. An asset is an item we can easily copy into another project. Again, this is a topic for a later video. Collection has a submenu where Move to Collection is the first entry. This option creates a panel where we can choose which existing collection we want to move the selected items to. It also offers the option to place them in a new collection. Link to Collection allows us to add the selected items to a new collection without removing them from their existing collection. Create New Collection supposedly creates a new collection which the Last Op panel allows us to name. But this option appears to be faulty since no new collection appears in the Outliner editor. Remove from Collection removes the selected object from a collection. A list of all collections containing the selected object will appear. All we need to do is click on the collection from which it is to be removed. There's also an option to remove the selected objects from all collections. Using this option will also delete the object from the scene. Remove from all collections removes the object from every collection it is in. Since we can choose the same operation from the previous menu option, this menu entry seems a bit pointless. Add Selected to Active Collection adds the selected object to the same collection as the active object. For example, if we select Yellow Cube and then Lampshade before choosing Add Selected to Active Collection, and the Floor Light collection from the panel, the yellow cube now appears in its original collection and in the Floor Light collection. Remove Selected from Active Collection has the opposite effect from the previous submenu command by removing the selected object from the collection containing the active object. In this case, we are removing Yellow Cube from the Floor Light collection. Library Override and Relations can be ignored for now. Parents submenu offers the parenting options we get when pressing Ctrl-P. Those were covered in an earlier video, but the submenu offers many more options that need not be detailed at this point. Modifiers offers an alternative way to add modifiers, but most users prefer to use the Modifiers page in the Outliner editor as we did when examining the Array modifier in earlier videos. Constraints, Track, and Link or Transfer Data are more topics that must be delayed to later. Shade Smooth is designed to adjust the shading on curved objects to make the flatness of the faces that make up the shape less obvious and hence create a more realistic curve, but without adding any more faces to the mesh. However, although this option may work well on a sphere, it has trouble when applied to a cylinder or cone, since it tries to create a curve effect over faces that are meant to appear flat, such as the top and bottom of the cylinder. The last op panel has a Keep Sharp Edges checkbox, but selecting or deselecting this option has no effect on the result. Exactly what is meant by sharp edges will be explained when we are looking at edit mode in more detail in a later video. Shade Auto Smooth corrects the problem with shapes that have both curved and flat areas by only creating the curve effect where faces are at a shallow angle to each other. We can see that it creates a more realistic visual when applied to a cylinder. The last op panel allows us to specify the maximum angle at which curved shading should be applied. Shade Flat is the default shading for all new objects. This emphasizes the flatness of the faces that make up a mesh. Animation, Rigid Body, Quick Effects, and Convert are for later videos. Show Hides submenu can be used to show or hide selected or unselected objects. We previously used the keyboard shortcuts for these options. Clean Up has only one of its submenu options highlighted. Remove Unused Material Slots removes any materials that have been set up previously but are currently not being used. This frees up computer memory, which may be important when memory is at a premium and there are many unused materials. We'll look at this in more detail in a later video. Delete and its X shortcut is a basic operation we've used many times before. Employing it from this menu entry deletes the selected items without the confirmation dialog box that we get when we use the X key. Delete Global can be used in more complex projects, which are beyond the scope of these videos.